And a very warm welcome once again. I think it's about episode 5 of the Old Gold Soccer Podcast on deck once again. The old hands, the experienced hands. Holy moly, that's what they thought about Captain Smith on the Titanic. Kyle Patterson, KP, how are you?
I'm great, Blakey. Good to be in harness with you two up front playing a 4-4-2 like the old days on this podcast.
Hey, I've got some names. I'm going to run some names by you. Now, if I say to you... Rocky O'Connor or David Ratcliffe, or I say Claudio Canosa or Sean Parton. Or what do you reckon?
What comes back to my mind, Blakey, is a commentary line that you rolled out talking about Sean Parton at Connor Reserve playing for Sunshine George Cross against Preston Macedonia on one of those wild days. And you came out with this classic perler line. I still love it to this day. Sean Parton cutting through like a rolling ball of butcher knives, making a mess of the Preston Macedonia forward line. What a line, a rolling ball of butcher knives.
But geez, we had some toughies about.
Oh,
they wouldn't survive in the game today. That they wouldn't spend a minute on the on the paddock. But gee, it made for some wonderful entertainment and theatre, didn't it?
The funny thing about Sean Parton was he was actually a nice bloke off the field. But if ever you wanted a classic case of white line fever, Sean Parton was it. You could talk to him the hour before the game. He'd be quite erudite. He'd be well spoken. You then go, who is this guy? Is this his stunt double? The game would start and suddenly there'd be bodies dropping everywhere. There'd be packs AFL style. He'd be running through packs. And he made, and for some reason, he took a personal dislike to your favourite player of all time, Paul Trimboli.
Yeah.
Didn't he? What was that about?
I'm of the understanding that they were pretty good mates off the field.
Really?
I know, I remember one particular game, and did Sean go down to Morwell? I think he did,
he played for Morwell for a while.
Yeah, I do remember one particular game when Morwell were playing South Melbourne. Sean Parton and Claudio Canosa, absolutely. And this is what I loved about Trimmers, was he was getting hammered. He was getting hammered. He was getting up, and no histrionics, but I would have just politely bowed and left if I was Trimble, he was getting killed. Because Canosa was another bloke. He came from the Sharkies, West Adelaide Sharks, I think. And he was a lovely bloke too, big Argentinian fella, red hair.
Yeah.
But geez, you wouldn't cross him.
Ferocious.
Vlado Vanis was another one, the bull moose. He was, and there was a bloke who was there was and I'm sorry if this is Victoria centric, but that's where I saw most of my football, or soccer.
Soccer, please, old soccer podcast.
There was a bloke.
Do you see the word football here anywhere?
I saw.
Keep up with the program, please.
I'm doing the very best that I can under the circumstances. There's a lot of toughies going. The game was so different.
Well, it was different then, and thankfully FIFA did one of the. Look, I'm not a fan of FIFA at all. One of the few things they did was they started to change the rules about tackling from behind because too many forwards were getting mutilated. They also changed, which I think was for the best, the back pass rule, because centre backs used to get away with murder just playing the ball back to their goalkeeper all the time. So they balanced the field for the forwards, who we love to watch. They're our favourite players. I mean, and the game wasn't just physically tough. It was violent in many ways, and a lot of that violence spilled over, Blakey, into the terraces.
I don't think it did, I think it was...
Well, it did at Pratton Park in Sydney, the famous Pratton Park riot. Let me finish. Jerry Gomez, who was, again, one of these lovely guys who was on the field a different personality, he tried to tackle someone, and I think he basically kicked Marshall Soper in the head, okay? Marshall went down, retaliated, got the red card, which is one of those perverse things that we do in football. You get an axe in your back, and you turn around and you slap the guy who put the axe in your back, and you get sent off, and the axe murderer gets to stay on. Anyway, there was that day the famous Pratton Park riot, which was caused by an on-field incident, angst with the referee, angst with Jerry Gomez, and next minute... And it's still on YouTube, by the way. If anyone doesn't believe me how bad it was, you can go to YouTube and search Pratton Park riot. All will be revealed.
I've got to mention this, though, and this has been a bugbear of mine as well over the journey, particularly with the new soccer people who seem to carry on.
No, hang on. I've got to stop you there. You said new soccer. You meant to say new football.
The new football people who seem to have this completely misguided imagery of the NSL being a series of running ethnic battles. That was pretty much all it was. And I want to make the point here. There's maybe 5,000 NSL games over the 25 odd years. It was very rare for a Pratt and Park.
I agree.
But I'm only saying that for anybody that's listening in from the new football saying, oh, yeah, that's exactly, it was all these ethnic people built. That's crap. Never. It happened rarely. When it did happen, it sticks in your memory as the Pratt and Park.
Of course, and because the commercial media would then jump on it and turn it into an ethnic riot.
Do you remember, the amount of times that I've seen edits on news programs, and there was a thing called The Panel on Channel 10 for a while,
right.
And they completely butchered. I called a night game between Melbourne Knights and Perth Glory, and there was an issue with Despotovsky and so forth, but it was so minor. You didn't even know it had happened.
Yeah, correct.
You know, it was just crap.
I was at that game, and it might have been a few people got around the Perth bus to heckle him. That was about it.
That was about it. But they edited the commentary and everything else to make it look as if there was incendiary sort of riots going on all the time. It's just crap.
But that's a good segue, Blakey, because as much as I love old soccer, I will defend the decision taken by Frank Lowy and his administration to basically remove from the A-League any participation by clubs who are based on one ethnic community, and two, to make certain that there were no ethnic names. The reason this is important because Frank Lowy would not have got Hyundai, Fox Sports, all the state governments that put their stadiums in, apparel deals. He would not have got those because, unfortunately, the NSL had finished on such a low note. No commercial sponsor was going to come in. So I'm sorry for people who think that Frank Lowy had some sort of vendetta against the old soccer clubs. It wasn't the case. He was from an old soccer club himself. Alcoa was his club. That was his lifelong passion.
Sydney
the Slickers. He did it for purely business reasons. Frank Lowy was a businessman. So I know, Blakey, that you still think they were hard done by, but I got to tell you that Frank Lowy was not setting out to remove ethnic clubs and names from the A-League. It was a business imperative, in my opinion.
Well, that's a savage reflection on the business community in itself. But I mean, that's another story altogether. But it just still rankles with me that I knew so many people in the game, really lovely people, who had their hearts broken over the journey by the ethnic cleansing kind of bandwagon, which, as I mentioned before, 81, it probably was predominant then. Certainly in the mid to late 90s, David Hill and George Negus and all that mob. It's just, it hurt people, Kyle. It hurt people who were integral to the game, and they were central to the growth of the game. And it just, I'm an empath like that. I just felt their hurt, and they'd been so kind to me.
Okay, here is the bottom line. I know you're going to hate this because it's about business. And I was a journalist. I became a businessman, if you like, a marketing guy. It's about money. If the clubs who used to in the 1960s, and my dad played for Juventus, Melbourne, against South Melbourne and George Cross, big club in those days, there'd be 20,000 people paying good coin to come to the game. If those clubs had continued to build crowds and keep and invest in social clubs and build their clubs, the A-League never would have had to happen. We would have had vibrant, rich, professional clubs called Hellas, George Cross, Alexander. The fact of the matter is we didn't. The clubs dwindled to the point where the National Soccer League was closed down. So some of those people need to get in front of a mirror if they want to see who is to blame for their demise. It wasn't Frank Lowy. It was some of the people who ran those clubs into the ground. I'm sorry for them that happened, but that's the truth.
Yeah. Oh, look, I can't argue that because I know nothing about marketing.
It's not marketing, mate. I mean,
the marketing of the game. I know I'm not a financial. Have a look at me. I drive a Camry, 2001 Camry that's falling to pieces. You see the clothes that I wear. I'm not a money person. I don't live in that world. I don't understand it. But I respect your opinion on that. But I still feel so so broken-hearted.
Okay, look, nostalgia can do that. Let me say this to you. Someone sent me a YouTube clip recently. The year that Brunswick Juventus and Heidelberg Alexander were kicked out of the National Soccer League. Melita Eagles by David Hill. You know what the biggest crowd that year was for Heidelberg and Juventus?
No.
The protest rally when they get kicked out.
Okay.
If those people had turned up home and away, then would have been a different story. Suddenly they get kicked out, and then you've got 12, 15,000 people at Olympic Village chanting obscenities about David Hill. I'm sorry, that wasn't David Hill's fault. That was the fault of the clubs who let their businesses run into the ground. And so I know it's great. It's very tempting to rewrite history, right? Yes, Heidelberg Alexander were one of the great NSL clubs. Yes, they had massive crowds. Yes, the Melbourne derby between Heidelberg Alexander and South Melbourne Health was one of the great sporting events in Melbourne every year. However, it didn't stand the test of time.
Look, I appreciate that, but then the other side of the coin, and I will argue vociferously with you about this, is because explain then the demise of, let's say, the Melbourne Knights. The Melbourne Knights produced, they were a production factory for quality players during the 90s. They were in the finals every year. They were playing in grand finals, and they were exporting players. You know, Joe Simonich and all those people. They were probably in the 90s. They defined the game in this country, and yet by 2000, I remember going to call the game between your mates, the Auckland Kings, and the Melbourne Knights, and I was doing it for Sky TV, and I went out to, it was a day game. I went out there, and I was sitting in the commentary area, and I was just looking around the sparsity of the crowd, and I just thought, what has happened here? Because they were crushing the life out of these clubs. They weren't welcomed. They weren't encouraged. They weren't. People were just walking away from the game. There was splits between friends at Melbourne, Croatia, because of the way things were.
Sure, I'm not saying it was a simple glide path that the clubs were big crowds one day.
But you used Alexander as a template, and I don't think that's an unfair point, or the unfair argument that you made about Heidelberg and Juventus. But then on the other side of the coin, what you did do is by ostracising the ethnic community, you killed off the likes of South Melbourne Hellas and Melbourne Knights. And it happened really rapidly. It was like astounding at the way those two clubs dropped off.
Sure. Look, once they weren't in the National Soccer League, they lost a lot of the prestige, a lot of the symbols of being in a national comp. However, and I don't agree with this business decision, but the same people that Frank Lowy employed to design the league decided one team, one town. That one team was never going to be South Melbourne or Heidelberg or Melbourne, Croatia
and yet we're trying to lure them back into a dodgy second division idea. You know, they're on their hands and knees going, oh, come on, we want you. It's look, I'll say this again. We keep repeating the same mistakes. That's all we do, because, you know, if you're South Melbourne, okay, and you watch. We don't want you to be ethnic. We do want you to be ethnic, you know, and then you're out of the competition. But now we want you back into it. You know,
I agree. Look,
like, get some. Water finds its own bloody levels. Leave this stuff alone.
Look, on the second division, we'll go there quickly. That's another discussion. But it looks to me that idea is not going to get off the ground. Well, it looks dead.
I'm going to go with duh. Well, because it was never going to, Kyle.
Well, hang on. There was a lot of people boosting it. There was clubs putting expressions of interest, the money. They thought it was a great idea. I always thought it was lunacy, the quickest way to go broke. And I was worried about the houses of the committee men who would guarantee the bank loans. I was worried about those people. Back to my point. If these clubs, I'll give you an example. Marconi Fairfield, one of the few clubs, and they weren't in the first wave of Italian clubs because there was a bigger club, RPA Leichhardt in Sydney, like Melbourne Juventus here. Marconi was one of the few clubs of that era to go and buy land, build a social club, give themselves an independent revenue stream. They became the biggest club in Australia thanks to pokies, gaming revenue, hospitality revenue, etc., etc. Yep. And a club like Brunswick Juventus, my dad used to play for them, so I know a bit of the history. They had there used to be a rotation. The wealthiest Italian businessman in any given year would be told, you're president this year, tip your money in, make sure you beat the Greeks, and then you can go your own way. Now, if someone had said, no, you know what, we're not going to spend all the money on the team this year on players, we're going to buy some land in Brunswick, for example. Imagine what a couple of blocks of Brunswick houses could have been bulldozed for a ground, a social club. that club would still be in existence today, right? Now, what has happened to Juventus? One of the most famous clubs of Victorian soccer.
Now there's two of them, and they argue about which one's the original one.
You serious?
Yeah, no. So I'm 100% serious. There's two there's two Juventuses. One's Brunswick Juventus, and one is something else.
Okay, well, I rest my case.
The issue, and see, the issue that you're talking about with Juventus, they splintered themselves to some degree because Juventus stood alone as the Italian flagship. But then during the 70s and their demise into the 80s, all of a sudden people were filtering off. They were just getting disenchanted. So all of a sudden then you had Essen and Triestina, and you had Bulleen, you had East Brunswick, you had, so you've got a dozen Italian clubs, and all of a sudden you've splintered. I've got to tell you a story about Marconi. Can we be anecdotal for a minute?
Sure. I'll
tell you what I learnt from Marconi was how to bounce a car away from a place where it shouldn't be. I remember Heidelberg were playing Marconi up at Marconi Stadium. It was about 1979 or 78, and I thought, oh, bugger this, I've got nothing to do. So I had a Ford Falcon V8.
Yeah.
I jumped in the Ford, and I drove all day. It was a Wednesday night.
Solo? Did you have a crowd with you?
No, I had no friends. And ended up at Marconi Stadium on this Wednesday night for a cup game. And, of course, it was all farmland around Marconi Stadium back then. There was no housing. So all the cars were filtering through this wire fence next to the ground and parking in there. The game ended. We went back to get our cars because I was going to drive back to Melbourne that night. And some prick had parked his car across the entrance to this park, this fucking... Anyway, all these big muscly blokes, they got around the car and bounced it away from... And I thought, I didn't know you could do that. But it was an education. It was a huge education for me because my V8 overheated on the way home that night. So I had to stop at the Goulburn Valley Base Hospital, and I slept in the car there. I was just, this is what I meant before. I think one of the earlier podcasts. It used to be an adventure. All these things were an adventure when you were young.
An away game.
And we're not allowed to, we can't do that anymore.
Back to topic, Blakey. So
we were on a topic.
We were on a topic, which was ethnic names. Now, they're making a comeback, okay? I'll tell you a funny story for me. When I was at Football Federation Australia, I got invited into the senior lawyer's office and said, we are going to have this policy on ethnic names, i.e. they're going to be kind of phased out or banned. I said, okay. He said, I've got some examples on the whiteboard of some of the names that are really, breaking the spirit of the policy. And at the top of the list was a club, Box Hill Pythagoras. Now, I looked at it and went, hang on. I played for that club for 15 years. That's my old club. And they've had some amalgamations, fell on hard times.
That's another Italian club for a while.
They were Box Hill Inter, and now they're Box Hill Pythagoras. And they said, but we can't have that because it's overtly Greek, because Pythagoras obviously was a Greek philosopher and mathematician. Now, I had to then say to them, okay, look, because I was suggesting the club was trying to, instead of calling themselves like Hellas, which is the word for Greece, they were calling themselves after a Greek figure. And you know what? At the end of the day, that policy's been scrapped. But the merit of it was this, that the game needed to become more open to government funding. We get ripped off year after year by the AFL getting money and rugby league getting money and cricket getting money. And the whole idea that there was a barrier for a local council if you didn't have a district name. So if you were Box Hill Soccer Club, boom, you'd be in. Box Hill Pythagoras, you're going to have a barrier. I'm not saying I agree with that, but that was part of the thinking behind it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that just defies logic, doesn't it? Because you invite people in to live in this country. The governments do. They encourage it, and to have them utilising a name that will resonate with people that are of a similar background. It doesn't make sense. It just doesn't. I remember you gave me an example about what was the club in Darwin or something?
Well, I think Darwin Celtic got into the crosshairs as well because Celtic was regarded as a club that was Celtic, Gaelic in origin, and you couldn't really let that club through and stop Box Hill Pythagoras.
Oh, Lord, it's all in the name, isn't it? As long as we turn everything into football, new football, and we get rid of the ethnic names, it's going to push the game right over the bloody top, Kyle. Right over the top.
But here's my contention. It was done by Frank Lowy for commercial reasons. It was done down the line for, again, funding reasons. Okay? Now, it's all gone, though. It's all back now. You can call your club what you want. And so we've now got, in the game, we saw this.
That phrase in itself troubles me. You can call your club what you want, which you should be able to do anyway.
Okay, you can. Okay, good point. So this year, we have, in the league that Box Hill plays in, there's Melbourne, Serbia. That's right. So
it started off as Fitzroy United, wasn't it? Or Fitzroy something or other.
Yeah. So their ethnic names are still bedeviling you, Blakey.
No, I've always thought, okay, I'll say this again. As a young man, as a teenager, who accidentally fell into this world of soccer and met the most marvellous people, I was greeted so warmly. I learned about cultures that were completely foreign to me, and I could never understand why there was any issue with that. For my life. It changed my life. It changed my life, Kyle. I ended up being so in love with the whole thing that I, got involved as a journalist.
And I 100% with you, and I did the same thing. I left school to go and work with Soccer Action with Laurie Schwab and cover the Victorian State League, which was a league of all clubs representing different football-loving communities, whether it was English, Altona City, whether it was Serbian, Maltese, Italian, Greek. However, all I'm saying is the whole old soccer, new football divide and blaming Frank Lowy for some sort of ethnic cleansing is wrong.
I haven't mentioned Frank Lowy.
I have, because he gets blamed for this, and so does his administration. All I'm saying is, and we have to come back and do another episode on this one. There's a fair bit of heat in it. I'm saying those clubs. Well, that's right. Those clubs have to look in the mirror a little bit as well as find a villain to blame.
Sydney City Slickers. What a great experience that was.
Let's wrap it up. This is the Old Gold Soccer Podcast. I'm KP. Hope you've enjoyed listening. Tell your friends about us. Tell your old soccer friends or your new football friends about us.
I'm resigning after this one.
You're resigning. You're not allowed to. You haven't signed a contract, but I decide when you can resign. That's the way it works. Thanks again for listening. The Old Gold Soccer Podcast. Check us out on TikTok and Instagram, and download us anywhere you find good podcasts.